Richard Hallberg never believed in ghosts. But that October morning, as the sky hung low over Maple Glen Cemetery and a light mist clung to the grass like breath on glass, something felt unclean. Not in the physical sense. The air smelled like whetstone, like decaying leaves and distant rain. But it was something beneath all that, a disruption. For nearly a decade, he had walked the same graveled path, placed the same bouquet of lilies before the same simple headstone, and left without a word. Routine, control, silence. But this morning wasn't silent. There was a man there, and a child. A little girl with eyes that tore time in half. Richard didn't approach right away. His black Tesla, always parked at the cemetery's far gate, sat idle in the mist, like a silent sentinel. He stepped out, straightened the collar of his overcoat, and stared toward the row of elms that framed his daughter's grave. But his usual solitude had been shattered. A young black man stood beside the grave, back turned, shoulders slightly hunched, holding a small girl who clung to his neck with a kind of unspoken panic. Her tiny hand gripped a worn elephant plush. The other was wrapped in the collar of his shirt. She was no older than 4. Richard's first reaction was irritation. This wasn't a place for intrusions. For 9 years, this sacred hour belonged to him and him alone, not for tears, not for prayers, just a transaction of memory. He brought flowers. He left silence. It was how he managed pain. He stepped forward, crunching a brittle leaf beneath his heel. The man turned. Their eyes met. Something in the man's face cracked. Not guilt, not fear, but a grief that recognized grief. The little girl slowly turned too, and when her eyes found Richard's, everything inside him stopped moving. Pale green, the exact same shade as Allison's, so precise it looked like God had traced them from the same stencil. His throat tightened. "Can I help you?" he said, voice low, flat. The man held the child closer, almost instinctively. "I didn't know you'd be here," he said after a pause. His voice wasn't defensive, it was reverent. "We usually come in the mornings." "We," Richard repeated. "You knew my daughter?" The man nodded. "Yes, sir. I'm Deshaun Merritt." "Merritt," Richard echoed, scanning him. "You from Westlake?" "Yes, sir. I waited your table once, but I met Allison somewhere else." Richard's gaze shifted, the girl still staring, still holding the elephant. "And this child?" Deshaun hesitated. "Her name is Ilya." A pause. Richard's voice hardened. "Why are you at my daughter's grave, The man swallowed. "Because Allison meant everything to me." Richard flinched as if the words had a physical weight. He stared at the child again. The resemblance was staggering. Her curls, her dimples. "Those eyes are telling me. She's Allison's daughter." Deshaun nodded. "Yes, sir." Silence stretched. Wind moved through the cemetery like breath between sobs. "That's a bold claim," Richard said, voice turning cold. "You have proof?" Deshaun stood firm. "I have documentation. Paternity. From when I filed for custody? After she passed?" Richard blinked. "Why didn't you come to the funeral?" "I did," Deshaun replied quietly, sat in the back, didn't speak, didn't belong. Richard remembered the suits, the flash of cameras, the layers of grief, disguised in handshakes and sympathy. It was plausible someone like Deshaun could go unseen. "How long were you with her?" Richard asked. 2.5 years. "She never mentioned you." "I know," Deshaun said, gaze steady. "She was afraid you wouldn't approve," she said. "She spent her whole life trying to be what you wanted." That cut Richard deeper than he expected. He tried to hide it behind posture. "And you think bringing her here helps?" "I think pretending Allison never existed would be worse," Deshaun said. "The girl?" Ilya began to hum softly, her voice floating like a ghost between them. "She looks like her," Richard murmured. "So much like her." Deshaun nodded. "Sometimes it hurts to look at her." "What do you want, Deshaun? Money?" The man's eyes flared, just briefly. "No, sir. I've never asked for a dime. I work. I raise her. She's mine to protect." Richard didn't trust easily, didn't believe in gestures. But what Deshaun pulled from his bag next made the earth tilt. A weathered leather journal, bent at the spine, pages worn from use. "She wrote everything in here," Deshaun said. "Poems, schedules, thoughts, things she never said out loud." Richard didn't move, didn't reach for it. He stared at the journal like it was radioactive. "I don't expect it to change anything," Deshaun said, "but it changed me." Richard stood frozen in the middle of the cemetery path, his breath visible in the cold morning air. The journal in his hands felt heavier than any object he'd ever held, heavier than the casket they'd lowered 9 years ago. The worn leather cover, faded and warm to the touch, pulsed like it still carried her heartbeat. His daughter's words, written in quiet, in chaos. In moments no one else witnessed, spilled out of the pages like rain after a long drought. As he turned each page, a version of Allison emerged that he'd never met. Funny, fragile, furious, deeply in love. One entry, ink smudged with what he imagined were tears, read, "He holds me like I'm not broken. And maybe that's the first time I've believed I'm not." Richard didn't notice Deshaun had stepped a few feet back, giving space not just physically, but spiritually. The man didn't hover, didn't press. Just stood, coat zipped to the chin, with Ilya sleeping quietly in his arms. That child, those eyes, they haunted Richard. Every time he blinked, he saw Allison as a child, racing through their garden barefoot, twirling in the same sunlight Ilya now existed under, and for the first time, he realized his daughter wasn't just gone. She had lived a life he never bothered to ask about. I didn't know, Richard murmured. His voice cracked around the edges, the way it hadn't since the night they called to say she was gone. Any of this. Deshawn nodded slowly. I know. She didn't tell many people. Richard turned another page. A doodle of a treehouse. She wanted to build one. Deshawn offered, said when we got our own place. She'd build it for Ilya, said she'd climb up there and scream into the sky if she had to. A deep silence fell between them. Not awkward. Just dense. Holy, I thought she left because of me, Richard said. Finally, we fought the night before, before everything. I told her she was wasting her time, that what she had wasn't real, that it wouldn't last. Deshawn's jaw clenched slightly. Not from offense, but recognition. She told me, he said gently. Richard looked up, pained. Why'd she stay with you, even after knowing I wouldn't have accepted it? Deshawn shifted Ilya on his chest. Because I didn't make her choose. I just loved her. And when she didn't feel worthy of love, I waited. Tears prickled the corners of Richard's eyes. He hadn't cried in years. Not even at the funeral. But now, in the quiet of this forgotten cemetery, the weight of 9 years came flooding in, like water through a cracked dam. Do you have that video? He asked. Deshawn reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a phone. He hesitated, then offered it carefully, like a holy relic. I never showed anyone. It was the last day in the hospital. She wanted to say something, to Ilya just in case. I didn't think it was right to keep it to myself anymore. Richard took the phone. The screen lit up with a still frame Allison, hair thin from treatment, face pale but peaceful, holding her baby against her chest. He tapped play. Her voice filled the air, soft and steady. Hey baby girl, it's Mama. If you're seeing this, it means I'm not around to say it out loud, but I want you to know, you are the best part of me. The only part that ever made sense. And I hope you laugh too loud and dream too big and never let the world make you small. And when you look in the mirror and see these green eyes, just remember, your mama saw the whole world in them. Richard didn't realize he was sobbing until the screen blurred from his own tears. The sound broke from his chest like something primal. And still, Deshawn didn't move, just stood with reverence, holding the very child the video spoke to. She sounds strong, Richard whispered. She was, Deshawn answered, even when everything hurt. The older man lowered the phone. I failed her. No, Deshawn replied. You didn't know how to love what you didn't understand. That's not the same thing. Richard looked at him rarely, looked a man who had been erased from his daughter's obituary, left off the guest list at her funeral, ignored for nearly a decade and, yet he stood here with grace, not bitterness. I don't deserve a second chance, Richard said. No one does, Deshawn said. But if you show up, maybe that's enough. Richard turned to Ilya. Her tiny body rose and fell against Deshawn's chest. Without opening her eyes, she whispered, in her sleep, Mama's voice. And something inside Richard cracked open. He knelt down slowly, gently touching the hem of her tiny coat. Hi there, sweetheart, he said softly. I'm a man, someone who loved your mama very much, and I'd like to get to know you, if that's okay. Ilya stirred, blinked up at him, then smiled. Not wide, not loud, just enough to say, I see you. Richard looked up at Deshawn. Would you two maybe come by for dinner sometime? Deshawn nodded. We'd like that. The wind stirred again. Carrying a single red leaf from the elm above, it landed gently at Richard's feet. He picked it up, stared at its veins, its flaw lines, its beauty. For the first time in 9 years, he felt like something was beginning, not ending. Richard could almost hear her voice, that soft, determined tone she used when she wanted to be heard, but not challenged. But I know what'll happen. He'll say it's not logical, that love isn't a career, that I'm wasting my time, ... And she would have smiled through dinner, nodded politely, swallowed the ache. That's what she always did when he disapproved, not out of fear, but fatigue. She was tired of explaining herself to a man who had already made up his mind. Tired of shrinking in rooms built from his expectations. He closed the journal, the paper still worn from his touch, and glanced up. His voice came out quieter than he expected. Who was she engaged to? Deshawn blinked, the question catching him off guard. Patrick Kessler, he said after a beat. He was from her MBA program. Polished. Safe. That word landed like a pin dropped in a cathedral. Safe, not loved, not chosen. Just ... safe. She broke it off a few weeks before she passed, Deshawn added. She never told you about him? Richard shook his head slowly. She didn't love him? No, Deshawn agreed. She said being with him felt like a job interview that never ended. Richard winced. That line dug deeper than Deshawn probably intended. He'd made her feel that way too. Performance-based approval. A checklist kind of love. No wonder she never felt safe with him, even when she lived under his roof. He turned the journal over and read aloud, Ilya kicked today. Deshawn kissed my stomach and cried. I didn't know men did that. My mom would have laughed, but it made me fall in love with him all over again. I wish I could tell Dad. I think he'd come around. If he saw what I see, Richard's voice broke at the end. His eyes flicked up in disbelief. She was happy. Deshawn nodded. She was. Richard laughed once. A breathless sound full of guilt. I never knew. She didn't want you to find out through grief, Deshawn said gently. She wanted to show you when she could stand tall in it. She was building her own life first, and I wasn't part of that life, Richard murmured. She wanted you to be, but on her terms, not yours. That hurt, but it also made. Since Allison had never stopped trying, he was the one who kept closing the door. Richard sighed. She was stronger than I gave her credit for. She always was. A few feet away, Ilya had wandered into a patch of sunlight, collecting tiny stones and pretending they were treasures. Every now and then, she'd look back to make sure Deshawn was still there. She never strayed far. Richard watched her. The curve of her cheeks, the tilt of her head, the way she hummed softly to herself. How do you do it? He asked, not taking his eyes off her. Raise a child, work, grieve. Deshawn took his time. Some days I don't, he admitted. Some days I just get through it. But Ilya's laughter keeps me honest, and Allison ... She left me enough to keep going. Richard flipped the journal, closed again. Did she ever blame me? Deshawn sat down beside him, their knees almost touching. No, she struggled with you, but she wanted you in her life. She never gave up. I gave up on myself after she died, Richard confessed. Buried myself in work. Sold one company, bought another, wrote speeches, published a book. All of it noise. Nothing made sense after her. Deshawn didn't rush to answer. When he did, it was soft. She would have wanted you to heal, not hide. A long silence stretched between them. Then Deshawn said, almost like a memory surfacing, she told me once, that grief is just love with nowhere to go. Richard nodded. I didn't get that ... until now. He reached out and tapped the journal. Would you mind if I held on to this? Just for a while. I'd like that, Deshawn said. It's why I brought it. Richard stood slowly, his joints stiff, but his heart lighter somehow. He walked over to the stroller and gently adjusted the sunshade over Ilya's head. She stirred, blinking up at him. Those green eyes, not just Allison's, but something more ancient, more knowing. She smiled, soft and slow. She has her mother's light, Richard whispered. She has your quiet, Deshawn replied. She watches people, always thinking. But Richard wasn't thinking anymore. He was feeling, and for the first time in years, he didn't flinch from that. He knelt beside Ilya. Hi there, sweetheart. I am someone who loved your mama very much, and I'd really like to get to know you, if that's okay. Ilya tilted her head, thoughtful, then gave a tiny nod. Okay. And just like that, something opened. A door he'd never knocked on before, a world he'd never dared imagine. But it wasn't over yet. He looked at Deshawn. She was driving to see me. That night, wasn't she? Deshawn hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, she finally decided to tell you. For real this time. Richard sat again, heart pounding. Tell me what happened. I need the truth. She left my place late, Deshawn began. I offered to come with her, or wait till morning, but she wouldn't have it. Said she'd waited long enough. Said she wanted to do it face to face. He paused. Ilya crawled nearby, hugging her toy elephant. She took Route 9, said it'd be faster. Rain came down heavy just after she left. About 20 minutes later, someone called me. Found my number on her phone. Emergency contact. Richard stared ahead, unmoving. They said she lost control on the curve past Croton Reservoir, hydroplaned, spun into the opposite lane. A delivery truck couldn't stop in time. Hit her on. Richard winced. She was alive when they pulled her out, barely. 2 hours in surgery. I got there just before it ended. Why didn't anyone call me? Richard asked. His voice was almost broken. She gave them my number again. I didn't know if I should call you. I was scared. Scared you'd come in blaming her, and I didn't want that to be the last thing she heard. Richard turned away. She kept asking for me, didn't she? Deshawn nodded. She couldn't speak, but she kept pointing to her phone. I told her you were coming. I lied. Richard clenched his jaw. I didn't check my voicemail until days later. He pulled out his phone, scrolled, then pressed play. Her voice filled the air. Hey Dad, ... I know it's late. I just ... I need to talk to you about something important. I promise I'm not in trouble. I just want you to see me. Really see me. I'm on my way now. Hope you're still awake. That was all. Just that ... Richard closed his eyes. I failed her. Deshawn didn't deny it. He didn't sugarcoat it, maybe, but not forever. You're here now. I didn't think anyone could feel this grief as deeply as I do. Deshawn looked him in the eye. I loved her too. They sat in the quiet again. She had a sense of humor, Richard said. Deshawn smiled faintly. She made everything feel possible. Ilya toddled over. Can I go to the swings? No. Swings here, sweetheart, Deshawn said. Maybe later. She looked up at Richard. You're the man from the picture. Richard blinked. What picture? Allison showed her. Deshawn said. Told her stories. She called you Grandpa Richard, even though she didn't know if you'd ever meet. Richard crouched, hands on his knees. Hi, Ilya. I'm glad to meet you. She nodded. Like, it was the most natural thing in the world, but Richard knew better. This moment, this child, this second chance, was anything but ordinary. It was holy. She said to let her make up her own mind when she's older. Richard leaned back on the bench, exhaling. She was a better person than I gave her credit for, he admitted. She was, Deshawn said simply. Ilya wandered back toward the grass, her pink bow slipping to one side. She seemed unfazed by the weight in the air. At 3 years old, grief was still a grown-up word. She's been through a lot, Richard murmured, eyes tracking her. We both have, Deshawn replied. She didn't talk much those first few months after Allison passed. Nightmares. She'd cry in her sleep, reach out for someone who wasn't there. Richard's throat tightened. How'd you handle it? Badly at first, Deshawn confessed. I couldn't sleep either, but I kept showing up. Every morning, every time she cried, I held her. We figured it out together. Richard gave a slow nod. That's parenting. Deshawn glanced over. It's mostly just messing up and showing up anyway. That pulled a faint smile from Richard. Duh. How'd she get her name? Ilya? She came 6 weeks early, Deshawn said. Allison was panicking in the hospital. Had 10 names picked. Hated all of them. Then she saw her, and whispered it. Ilya. Richard tried it under his breath. Ilya, she said. It sounded like a breath, Deshawn continued. Said the world was already loud enough. The words hit harder than Richard expected. She sounds like she grew into herself, he said. In those last few years? She did, Deshawn nodded. Braver than she let on. Richard looked down at the folder resting on his lap. I'll be honest. My first thought when I saw you here, I thought you were lying, or wanted something. I expected that, Deshawn replied unbothered. You didn't know me, and it's hard to believe someone kept a whole child's secret. Richard raised an eyebrow. It's not hard to believe. It's just painful. Deshawn nodded once. Different. Yeah. A pause followed. Not awkward, just heavy. The kind of silence that shifts things. What about her mom's side? Richard asked. Deshawn's face darkened. Passed when she was a baby. Liver failure. No siblings. Just me now? Just you, Richard echoed. Deshawn met his eyes. I'm not here for charity. I rent a place in Sleepy Hollow. Work double shifts, catering gigs on weekends. It's not glamorous, but it's honest. She has clothes, food, and someone who loves her. I never said you weren't doing a good job, Richard said quietly. No, but I know how it looks. Single dad, former waiter. Then you billionaire grandfather's just finding out. I can see the headlines already. Richard waved that away. I've seen worse. Don't care about appearances anymore. Ilya returned, holding up a small stick like a prize. I found a wand, she announced. Richard smiled. That's a good one. She pointed it at him. Are you magic? He chuckled. Not anymore. Dash watched them both. Something soft in his expression, relief. Maybe. Or something close to it. She likes you, he said. Richard exhaled. That makes one of us. Deshawn's smile dimmed. You mean, I haven't liked myself in a long time? Richard admitted. The words hung there raw and real. Deshawn nodded. Maybe this is your chance? To redeem myself. No, Deshawn said gently. To stop carrying all that alone. Ilya crawled back into her father's lap. He kissed the top of her head. Richard watched. Not with envy, but with something quieter. Regret. Maybe longing. I never held her as a baby, he said. Too focused on work. On building things. She was never angry, Deshawn said. She just wanted you to see her without expectations. I wish she'd told me. She tried, Deshawn said. But both men knew. Wishing changed nothing. Not the silence. Not the years. Only one question mattered. Now is there room left in the life Allison had left behind? They moved to the shade near the low stone wall where Deshawn had parked the stroller. The ground was cracked with roots and old sunlines. But Ilya didn't care. She sat cross-legged like it was her throne. Wand in hand, Deshawn handed her a juice box. Say thank you. Thank you, she chirped, stealing a glance at Richard. Those green eyes so familiar. Richard eased down onto the bench. She really looks like her. She acts like her too, Deshawn added, especially when she doesn't want to go to bed. Richard laughed, surprised by himself. How do you manage? He asked. Work, parenting, without help. Daycare. On weekdays, Deshawn said. Weekends, we improvise. Sometimes she comes to catering gigs, sits in the back with crayons while I plate shrimp skewers. You take her to work, when I have to. No one else to leave her with. Manager's cool about it. He knew Allison. Deshawn smiled faintly. She told him once, parenting is just love you don't clock out of. Richard stared at the ground. His daughter had always been more open than him, more human. I wasn't that kind of parent, he admitted. I scheduled vacations a year in advance. Canceled half of them. She didn't hold it against you, Deshawn said. She just learned to expect it. That landed heavier than any accusation. I want to change that, Richard said. After a long silence, if it's not too late, Deshawn tilted his head. For who? For her. Richard nodded toward Ilya. I don't even know what role I'd play. I'm not asking for anything. I just don't want to be a stranger. She doesn't need another adult making promises and disappearing, Deshawn said gently. But, firmly, I understand, Richard said. If I show up, I show up. That's the only promise. Deshawn looked at him reality, looked like he was weighing something. Do you want to try? Yes, then come for lunch. Richard blinked. Today? Deshawn smiled. Not today. You're not ready for her spaghetti experiments. But soon. I can bring dessert, Richard offered. Only if you eat the leftovers. They both smiled in this time. It wasn't strained. Ilya walked over and held out a small leaf. From you, she said solemnly. Richard took it with care. Thank you. That's your magic ticket, she whispered. Only works if you believe. He stared at the leaf like it was something sacred. I believe. Deshawn watched quietly. His gaze softened, tension melting away, trust beginning to form. She's got a big heart, he said. She got that from her mother, Richard replied. Ilya climbed onto the bench beside him, leaned against his arm, and sipped her juice. He frozen sherbet, didn't move. Warm with everyone? He asked. Not at all, Deshawn said. She's shy, but she knows who's safe. Richard looked down at her fingers wrapped around the juice box. I missed everything. Maybe not everything, Deshawn said. She's still growing. There's time, if you want there to be. I do, Richard said. But knowing something and acting on it? Two different things. Before he could take that next step, he had to answer the hardest question. Was he ready to be vulnerable again, to let go of the silence? The control, the version of himself he'd hidden behind? They sat together. The three of them. No speeches, no drama. Just the soft rhythm of movement and cautious peace. Ilya hummed while peeling the label off her juice. Deshawn leaned back against the stone wall, arms on his knees, watching. Richard broke the silence. Can I ask you something? Sure. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Even after Allison died, why? Wait 3 years. Deshawn sat forward, met his eyes. Because I didn't want to bring her memory to you like a warning, he said. Didn't want to show up and say, surprise your granddaughter. Deal with it. That's not who she was. And that's not how I wanted her remembered. Richard listened, nodded slowly. I figured, Deshawn added, if you found your way here, maybe it meant you were ready. And if I hadn't, then I'd still be raising her the same way, Deshawn said, with love. With Allison in every photo frame. Richard stood at the grave with the weight of 1,000 unspoken apologies pressing on his chest. The kind of guilt that doesn't yell, but whispers over and over again until it becomes the only voice you hear. The cemetery was quiet, draped in a cold mist, and every leaf that crunched beneath his shoes felt like a memory he had tried to bury. Allison Hayes. Her name was carved into stone, but it lived in the trembling hands of the man who had failed her. Deshawn stood to his right, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. While little Ilya clung to Richard's coat with sleepy eyes and the quiet trust only children can give. The same child he had once tried to forget now felt like the last piece of someone he should have protected, honored, believed. She always talked about the maple tree, Deshawn finally said, voice low. Said it made her feel safe. Like maybe the world hadn't hardened all the way yet. Richard nodded. That maple tree stood behind the grave, scarred by time, its roots tangled like the years they'd lost. I didn't come to make excuses, Richard murmured. Just to carry what I should have carried before. The days that followed didn't bring peace, they brought noise. Not the kind you hear with your ears, but the kind that echoes in coffee shops and grocery stores and Sunday sermons. Whispers became questions. Questions became headlines. Military woman denied honor by her own father. Then came the photos. The journal pages Deshawn had shared went viral. Allison's words scrawled in aching lines. I don't need him to be proud. I just wish he'd seen me. And suddenly, a quiet town was staring into a mirror it had spent years avoiding. Some people sympathized. Some defended Richard, but most sat still in the tension of truth, because what had happened to Allison wasn't just about one man. It was about every father who demanded silence instead of support. Every neighbor who said she's doing fine while watching her carry everything alone. Richard avoided the news. He didn't need a headline to remind him what he lost. Instead, he walked through the town he once stood tall in the hardware store he used to run, the diner where he never tipped the black servers, and for the first time, he noticed how many faces turned away from him now. Not in anger, but in something worse, disappointment. One afternoon, he sat at the kitchen table with Ilya and Deshawn, her coloring book open, crayons scattered like shattered innocence. Do you remember her laugh? He asked. Deshawn didn't answer. Instead, he slid over an old cassette tape. She recorded bedtime stories for Ilya before deployment. We play them when she can't sleep. That night, Richard sat alone and pressed play. Allison's voice filled the room. Soft, loving, undeniably hers. And the brave little girl in the story, she never needed a crown. She just needed someone to believe she could fly. Richard wept. Flashbacks came like lightning sharp, sudden, unforgiving. He saw Allison at 9, standing in the hallway with a scraped knee, asking for a hug. He had waved her away, muttering something about toughness. He saw her at 16, home from ROTC, wearing her hair natural, eyes bright. He remembered telling her to look more presentable if she wanted to be taken seriously. And then he saw the day she left, bags packed, eyes glassy, saying, "It's okay, Dad, I get it," but she never really did. And he never corrected her. The town's annual Veterans Banquet approached. For the first time, people were whispering that Allison deserved a tribute. The board was hesitant, too political, too divisive. But Deshaun wasn't having it. He called them out in a community meeting. You hang photos of heroes all over town, but the only black woman who gave everything, you ignore her because she didn't make you comfortable. Silence followed. And then, one voice from the back. He's right, the dam broke. A teacher spoke up, then a nurse, then an old Vietnam vet who said, she was braver than most of us. Richard didn't speak. He just sat there, feeling something shift in the room, a collective reckoning. The night of the banquet came. The auditorium was full, flags lined the stage, and on a large screen behind the podium, a photo of Allison appeared, uniform crisp, eyes fierce, baby Aaliyah in her arms. Deshaun stepped up first. His voice cracked. She didn't die a hero, she lived one, and she did it without your applause. Then Richard walked forward. People whispered, unsure what he'd say. He took the mic, voice shaking. I was supposed to protect her, but I chose pride over presence. And now all I can do is carry her legacy. Even if I'm too late to do it right, I won't be silent anymore. There was no applause, just stillness, reverence, a collective breath held, then a slow rising standing ovation. Later, Richard and Deshaun sat outside the hall, Ilya asleep, on Richard's lap. I never asked you to fix it, Deshaun said. I just needed you to show up. Richard looked up at the stars. I'm here now. I'll be here tomorrow, and the next day. If she taught me anything, it's that showing up too late is still better than never showing up at all. Weeks passed. Richard began volunteering at the local shelter Allison once supported in secret. He read 2 kids, cleaned bathrooms, gave quietly, not for redemption, but because doing nothing had become unbearable. He built a little library at the shelter, called it Allison's Corner. Inside were her journals, photos, her medals, and a plaque that read, she carried the world, now we carry her. One Sunday, he took Ilya to the old maple tree behind the cemetery. They laid out a blanket, brought sandwiches, laughed about the squirrels. Grandpa, Ilya said, was Mama brave? Richard smiled. She was the bravest person I ever knew. And now you've got her heart. Ilya leaned against him, small hand wrapped around his, and in that moment, the wind shifted through the leaves above them, not loud, not dramatic, but just enough to feel like Allison was there, smiling, watching. And so it ended not with a speech or an apology, but a promise, a quiet vow that sometimes the loudest way to love someone is to finally see them, not for who you wanted them to be, but for who they always were.